My name is Hillary Beatrix. I'm 28 years old. I work as a senior corporate event director in Chicago, and I possess a memory like a steel trap. On a crisp Saturday morning at exactly 8:14 a.m., I sat on the private balcony of a luxury spa in Wisconsin. I was wearing a plush robe, holding my phone, and watching the mist roll off the lake. 200 miles south, my parents were waking up on the most important day of their lives. At 6 p.m., 200 guests, including Chicago top financial elites, were scheduled to arrive at the exclusive Oakwood Country Club. They were coming to celebrate my parents' joint retirement and the launch of my father's new private consulting firm. The event was a logistical titan. The white rose floral arrangements alone cost $8,000. The catering was a $35,000 masterpiece featuring dry-aged steak and a champagne tower. My parents believed I had paid for every single cent of it out of daughterly duty. They were wrong. I opened our family group chat. I attached a single photograph. I typed a short, precise message, and then I powered my phone down entirely. I did not feel a shred of guilt as I signaled the concierge and ordered a mimosa. I knew exactly the sequence of events I had just set into motion. At 2 p.m., the venue manager would demand the final $81,000 balance. The auto draft I had scheduled against my father home equity line of credit would bounce. His bank accounts would freeze. The caterers would pack up the food, and my parents would have to face 200 wealthy investors in an empty ballroom with nothing but tap water and their own ruined reputation. Before I tell you exactly what that text said and the financial ruin it unleashed on my family, please take a second to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories, but do it only if you believe in karmic justice. Also, drop a comment and let me know your age and where you are watching from today. I love seeing who is part of this community. Now, let me take you back 5 years to the day my empathy died. I had just graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business management. 4 years of sleepless nights, 2 part-time jobs, $60,000 in student loans that I signed for alone without a dime of their help. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Saturday. At 10 a.m., my father Richard stood in our kitchen, spinning his car keys around his index finger. He refused to meet my eyes. My mother Susan stood by the door, already wearing a green and gold team scarf. "Hillary," my dad said, his voice flat and annoyed, "Connor's regional soccer semifinal got moved to this afternoon. We have to go." Connor is my younger brother. He was 19 at the time, playing amateur league soccer on a dusty field in a neighboring county. It paid nothing and meant nothing. "It is my college graduation," I whispered. My dad sighed. It was the universal sound of a parent burdened by their least favorite child. "A regional semifinal only happens once," he said, checking his watch. "You will just walk across a stage." This means more to him. I did not scream. I did not throw things. Something inside my chest simply crystallized, hardening into ice. I looked at the 2 people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters. I smiled a tight, perfect smile and said, "I understand." I walked across that stage to the sound of silence, and I never asked them for anything again. 5 years ago, I stood in the narrow hallway of my college apartment, holding a plastic hanger. Draped over it was a cheap black polyester gown and a bright gold sash. The sash indicated summa cum laude. It was a piece of fabric that cost $20 at the campus bookstore, but it represented 4 years of pure, unrelenting exhaustion. I had earned my degree in business management while balancing 2 part-time jobs. I worked early morning shifts at a local logistics warehouse checking inventory before the sun came up. I spent my evenings serving tables at a downtown restaurant where businessmen tipped poorly and complained about the ice in their drinks. I did all of this to survive while carrying the weight of $60,000 in student loans. I signed those promissory notes entirely on my own at 18 years old. My father, Richard, and my mother, Susan, had made it clear early on that their financial resources were reserved for what they considered vital family investments. I was not considered a vital investment. When I presented my college acceptance letters, my father handed me a pamphlet on federal student aid and told me that building my own credit would build character. I believed him then. I thought it was a lesson in independence. I did not realize it was simply a deflection of responsibility. The graduation ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a humid Saturday in late May. I had driven to my parents' house in the suburbs that morning. The plan was simple. We would have a quiet family breakfast, take a few pictures on the front lawn, and drive to the university arena together. I walked through the front door at 9:30, expecting the smell of coffee or the sound of my mother rushing to finish her makeup. Instead, the house was tense. The kitchen was spotlessly clean. No plates sat on the counter, no coffee brewed in the pot. My father stood near the marble island gripping his leather steering wheel cover and a set of car keys. He wore his weekend uniform of khaki slacks and a pressed polo shirt. He refused to look at me. His gaze was fixed on a stack of unopened mail. My mother was standing near the back door holding an insulated steel thermos. She was already wearing a green and gold knitted scarf. Those were the colors of my brother Connor Amateur Soccer Club. Connor was 19 years old. He played in a regional recreational league. It was not a collegiate division. It was not a pathway to a professional draft. It was a dusty community field in a neighboring county where young men who peaked in high school went to yell at volunteer referees. Connor had already dropped out of his local community college after one semester, claiming the professors did not understand his learning style. Since then, his entire existence revolved around twice-weekly soccer practices and asking our parents for gas money. I set my garment bag over the back of a dining chair. The silence in the room was heavy, thick enough to choke on. I looked at the green and gold scarf around my mother's neck. Then I looked at the car keys in my father's hand. "Hillary," my dad said. His voice was flat. It carried the specific, practiced tone of a man preparing to deliver a disappointment he felt no remorse over. Connor Regional Soccer semifinal got moved to this afternoon. The other team had a scheduling conflict with the field. "We have to go." I stood frozen. I calculated the driving distance in my head. The soccer complex was an hour north. My graduation arena was 40 minutes south. They could not do both. They had already made their choice. "It is my college graduation," I said. My voice did not shake. It came out as a quiet, measured statement of fact. My dad sighed. It was a sharp exhalation through his nose, the universal sound of a parent burdened by their least favorite child. He crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back against the counter. "Listen to reason, Hillary," he said. "A regional semifinal only happens once. The scouts might be there today. You are just going to walk across a stage and sit in a folding chair for 3 hours while some dean reads 1,000 names. You already have the degree. We saw your grades. We are proud of you. But this means more to him. He needs our support today." I shifted my gaze to my mother. She adjusted the thermos in her hands and offered a weak, sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. "We will take you out for a nice dinner next week, sweetheart," she promised. "We can go to that Italian place you like downtown." I did not scream. I did not throw my garment bag across the kitchen. I did not demand they stay or list the sacrifices I had made to earn that gold sash. Psychologists often talk about the fight or flight response, but there is a third reaction: freezing. But it was not fear that froze me. It was a sudden, profound clarity. For 23 years, I had operated under a delusion. I believed love was transactional. I thought if I just worked harder, achieved higher marks, caused fewer problems, and demanded less money, I would eventually earn their respect. I thought the summa cum laude honors would be the currency that finally bought my parents' attention. Standing in that pristine suburban kitchen, watching my father check his watch because he was eager to go watch his adult son kick a ball in the dirt, I realized the truth. The currency was fake. The game was rigged from the start. Connor could fail out of school, wreck his car, and rack up credit card debt, and he would still be the golden boy. I could build an empire from scratch, and I would still just be a logistical inconvenience. Something inside my chest simply crystallized. The desperate child seeking validation died right there on the hardwood floor. In her place, a very cold, very patient woman took over. I picked up my garment bag. I smoothed the plastic cover. I looked directly into my father's eyes. I smiled. It was a tight, perfect expression, revealing nothing of the shift that had just occurred in my mind. "I understand," I said. "Have a good time at the game." I turned around and walked out the front door. I drove myself to the university arena. I navigated the crowded parking lot alone. I sat in a holding room with hundreds of other students who were adjusting their caps and scanning the stands for their families. When it was my turn, I walked across the stage. The dean shook my hand and handed me the leather-bound diploma cover. As other names were called, the arena echoed with the sounds of air horns, cheering families, and screaming parents. When the announcer read Hillary Beatrix, the silence from the upper decks was deafening. I heard the scuff of my own heels on the wooden stage. I walked down the steps. I returned to my seat. After the ceremony ended, I did not linger on the campus green to take photos by the fountain. I drove back to my small apartment. I ordered a pizza. I framed my own diploma using a cheap wooden frame I bought at a discount store. I hung it on the wall above my desk. I stared at it for a long time, eating a slice of pizza in the quiet dark of my living room. I made a vow to myself that night. I would never ask Richard or Susan Carver for anything ever again. I would become entirely self-sufficient. I would build a wall of financial and professional security so high they could never reach over it. And I would watch carefully as their blind devotion to my brother slowly eroded their perfect lives. I did not know it then, but the opportunity to test that vow was already taking shape. While I was hanging my diploma on the wall, Connor was pulling a hamstring on that dusty soccer field. It was a minor muscle tear, but he would use it as a permanent excuse to quit the sport entirely, abandon any physical ambition, and move permanently back into my parents' basement. His athletic decline marked the beginning of his professional failure and the start of my corporate ascent. The trajectory of the Carver household over the next 5 years split into two distinct paths. My brother took the path of least resistance. Exactly 3 months after he ruined my graduation day, Connor tore his hamstring. He was sprinting for a loose ball in front of 30 bored spectators on a Sunday afternoon. My parents treated the incident like a national tragedy. My mother spent weeks hovering over him, applying specialized ice packs and carrying meals down to his bedroom on a tray. When the muscle finally healed, Connor announced he was not returning to the team. He sat at the kitchen table nursing a protein shake and declared the sport was too political. He claimed the coaches were blind to real talent and favored players with connections. My father nodded solemnly, agreeing that the system was rigged against his son. Connor hung up his cleats and traded them for a leather gaming chair. By the time he turned 24, he had established permanent residence in my parents' finished basement. He did not get a traditional job. He became an entrepreneur. That was the precise word my father used whenever neighbors or relatives asked about him. In reality, Connor bounced between multi-level marketing schemes. First, he tried selling dietary supplements. He filled my parents' garage with cardboard boxes of unpronounceable powders that nobody wanted to buy. When that failed, he pivoted to a foreign exchange trading algorithm that promised guaranteed daily returns. He wore tailored suits to film recruitment videos in our driveway, leaning against my father's leased sedan to project an image of wealth. He was the golden boy. He was permanently polished and permanently useless. He produced nothing but excuses, and my parents absorbed every single one of them. Meanwhile, I moved to Chicago. I rented a studio apartment so small I could touch the kitchen sink from the edge of my mattress. I started as an entry-level event coordinator at a Fortune 500 logistics firm. The environment was brutal. I worked 70-hour weeks. I skipped holidays. I survived on black coffee and relentless ambition. I learned to navigate the cutthroat reality of corporate event management, where a single mistake could cost a company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Within 3 years, I clawed my way up the ladder to become a senior event director. My daily reality involved orchestrating high-stakes corporate galas, managing 7-figure budgets, and coordinating international trade shows. More importantly, I learned the anatomy of a contract. I spent my days dealing with luxury caterers, venue managers, and union stagehands. I learned how to protect my company from vendors who failed to deliver. I learned about liability clauses, indemnification, and the irrevocable power of a guarantor signature. I learned that in the adult world, a verbal promise means nothing without ink on a page. I became an architect of ironclad legal agreements. I understood exactly how to structure a payment schedule to ensure the primary signer held all the financial risk. As my salary and title increased, my parents' communication strategy shifted. They rarely called to ask about my life. They never asked about my promotions or how I handled the grueling Chicago winters. My phone only rang when they needed a temporary loan to cover Connor's latest failure. My father would call on a Tuesday evening. He would ask about the weather for exactly 1 minute before pivoting to the real agenda. He possessed a remarkable ability to frame his demands as minor favors. "Hillary," he would say, his voice adopting a familiar, commanding tone, "Connor needs a small bridge loan for his new marketing software. It is just $1,200. He will pay you back next month when his commission checks clear." I knew the commissions would never clear. I knew the software was a scam, but I sent the money anyway. 6 months later, my mother would call. She would sigh heavily into the receiver and explain that Connor needed $800 to renew his business licensing fees because the state was being unreasonable. I sent that money too. $1,500 for a networking seminar in Miami. $900 to repair the laptop he dropped during a gaming session. I played the role of the reliable, silent bank. Every time I authorized a wire transfer, I felt a familiar, cold satisfaction. I did not send the cash out of love or daughterly duty. I sent it because every transaction was a receipt. I kept a meticulous digital ledger on my personal laptop, a hidden spreadsheet protected by a password. I tracked every date, every dollar amount, and every false promise of repayment. The resentment was a living, breathing thing in my chest. It grew with every bank notification. I was watching my parents drain their own resources to fund a fantasy. They were taking out home equity loans to maintain their comfortable suburban lifestyle while handing over their disposable income to a son who refused to work. They relied on my corporate salary to patch the holes in their sinking ship. They saw me as a bottomless well of emergency cash. They assumed my silence meant compliance. They did not realize I was keeping score. I let them believe I was the dutiful daughter. I let them think I was easily manipulated. Every $1,200 transfer was an investment in my own future detachment. I was buying my freedom one unpaid loan at a time. I was building a paper trail of their financial incompetence. If you have ever been the designated fixer for a family that treats you like a personal automated teller machine, you know exactly how heavy that burden feels. You know the exhaustion of watching people demand your hard-earned stability to fund their reckless choices. If you understand that specific kind of quiet fury, drop the word truth in the comments right now. My parents believed this dynamic would last forever. They thought I would continue to fund their golden child in perpetuity. That assumption paved the way for the single most arrogant demand they would ever make. The overlapping conflict began 7 months ago when they summoned me home for a rare family dinner to announce their early retirement. The delicate balance of our family dynamic shifted abruptly 7 months ago. My parents decided to take early retirement. My father was stepping down from his mid-level insurance firm, and my mother was leaving her municipal desk job. They summoned me back to the suburbs for a Sunday dinner. It was a rare invitation. Usually we only saw each other on major holidays or when Connor required a financial bailout. When I arrived, my mother had set the dining room table with her good china. Connor was already seated, scrolling through his phone and ignoring the conversation. My father sat at the head of the table. He did not look like a man preparing to enjoy his golden years. He looked energized, calculating, and ambitious. As soon as my mother served the roast chicken, my father cleared his throat and tapped his fork against his water glass. "We have an announcement," he said. "Your mother and I are officially retiring at the end of the year, but we are not just quietly fading away. We are going to throw a party, a real celebration. We want a gala, 200 people at the Oakwood Country Club." I set my fork down slowly. I knew the Oakwood Country Club well. It was the premier venue in the tri-state area. They catered exclusively to old money politicians and corporate executives. Their wait lists were notoriously long, and their pricing structure was designed to gatekeep. "Dad," I said, keeping my tone neutral, "a 200-person gala at Oakwood is a $50,000 undertaking at the bare minimum. They require mandatory in-house catering and a preferred vendor list for florals." My dad leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He offered a tight, knowing smile. "Well, Hillary," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "that is why we are telling you. You do this for a living. You have the connections, the vendor discounts, and the expertise. Plus, I am using this event to soft launch my new private insurance consulting firm. All my target clients will be there, the regional directors, the vice presidents, the wealth managers. I need to make a statement." He was not retiring. He was pivoting. He was using a retirement party as a Trojan horse to launch a lucrative second career. And he expected me to fund the entire marketing campaign. "We have supported you your whole life," my father continued, spreading his hands in a gesture of benevolent sacrifice. "We put a roof over your head and fed you. Consider this your ultimate gift to us. A way to show your gratitude for everything we have done." He did not ask, he commanded. He invoked a lifetime of basic parental obligations as a debt I owed him. He equated feeding a child with a $50,000 corporate launch party. Connor finally looked up from his phone. "Yeah, Hill," he chimed in, his mouth full of chicken. "Step up. Mom and Dad deserve the best. You are always talking about these fancy events you plan in the city. Now is your chance to do something useful for the family." I looked at my younger brother. Connor had not paid his own cell phone bill since 2018. He was wearing a designer sweatshirt my mother had purchased for his birthday. He was 24 years old, living rent-free, and offering his enthusiastic approval for a financial burden he would never carry. The sheer audacity of his comment was breathtaking. They wanted me to bankrupt myself. They wanted me to drain my savings, max out my credit lines, and leverage my professional reputation to fund a vanity project. They wanted me to orchestrate a flawless high society event so my father could secure consulting contracts while their golden boy sat back and offered unearned criticism. I looked at the three of them sitting around that polished dining room table. They were perfectly aligned against me. A united front of entitlement. They saw me the way they always had, not as a daughter, not as an independent adult, but as a resource to be extracted. I could have argued. I could have laid out my own financial obligations. I could have reminded them that I paid my own college tuition and built my own career. I could have refused outright and walked away. But as I looked at my father's smug, expectant face, I remembered my graduation day. I remembered the empty folding chairs in the arena and the unshakable truth that their love was a currency I could never earn. If I refused, they would simply complain about my selfishness to every relative and family friend. They would spin a narrative of an ungrateful daughter who abandoned her hardworking parents in their hour of need. But if I agreed, if I took control of the event, I could build the contract. I could dictate the terms. I could structure the liability. I picked up my water glass. The condensation was cold against my palm. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I let the silence stretch for just a few seconds longer than comfortable. I looked at my father and smiled. The exact same tight, perfect smile I gave him 5 years ago when he chose a dusty soccer field over my college degree. "You are right," I said softly. "You deserve a celebration that reflects exactly what you have earned. I will handle everything." My mother clapped her hands together, thrilled. My father nodded, looking immensely satisfied with his own persuasive abilities. Connor went back to scrolling on his phone. They handed me the reins without a second thought. They were completely oblivious to what I actually do for a living. They thought event planning was simply picking out linen colors and tasting cake flavors. They did not understand that my job is fundamentally about risk management. In the corporate logistics world, every detail is bound by legal agreements. Every vendor requires a guarantee. Every venue demands a primary signer. I knew how to build a paper trail that could withstand a federal audit. I knew how to insulate myself from financial ruin while legally binding the true clients to the debt. When I drove back to Chicago that night, my mind was already racing. I was not planning a party. I was constructing a trap. I needed to secure the Oakwood Country Club under a specific set of financial conditions. I needed to draft a master services agreement that looked standard but contained hidden mechanisms. I needed to ensure that when the final, devastating bill came due, my name was nowhere near the liability clause. The next morning, I walked into my office and drafted the initial venue inquiry. I set the wheels in motion for an event that would redefine our family hierarchy. I was about to give them exactly what they asked for, and it was going to cost them everything. My parents handed me the reins to their gala with the casual dismissal of executives assigning a coffee run to an intern. They did not ask about logistics. They did not inquire about vendor negotiations or contingency planning. They simply assumed my role was to select napkin rings and ensure the champagne was properly chilled. They remained profoundly oblivious to the actual mechanics of my profession. As a senior corporate event director, my entire existence revolves around liability. I do not just plan parties, I manage risk. I spend my days building legal barricades that protect my company from unpredictable disasters. I understand the precise language required to hold a client accountable. I know exactly how to structure an agreement so that when a bill comes due, there is no ambiguity about who must pay. The morning after our tense family dinner, I sat at my desk in Chicago, overlooking the city skyline. I opened my laptop and began drafting the architecture of my revenge. I approached the Oakwood Country Club not as a daughter planning a family gathering, but as a seasoned professional representing a high net worth client. The Oakwood Country Club operates on a strict financial model. They cater to a demographic that expects perfection and is willing to pay exorbitant premiums for exclusivity. A Saturday evening buyout for 200 guests requires a substantial commitment. Standard procedure dictates a 50% non-refundable deposit upon signing, with the remaining balance due 30 days prior to the event. I needed to bypass that standard structure. If Oakwood demanded an immediate $25,000 deposit, my father would balk. He would scrutinize the numbers, and the entire plan would unravel before it even began. I needed a mechanism that delayed the financial impact until it was too late to cancel. I utilized my corporate connections and a bit of industry leverage. I convinced the Oakwood Finance Department to waive the traditional upfront deposit in exchange for a standard industry letter of credit. This is a common practice in high-level corporate planning. It essentially guarantees payment by allowing the venue to draft funds directly from a verified asset account if the invoice is not settled by a specific deadline. I structured the Oakwood contract using my firm's most rigorous templates. I stripped my own name from any field indicating financial responsibility. I listed myself strictly as the authorized consulting agent. I designated Richard and Susan Carver as the primary guarantors. I drafted a master services agreement designed specifically to exploit my father's arrogance. The primary document was 20 pages of dense boilerplate legalese detailing noise ordinances, parking logistics, and dress codes. In the financial section, I intentionally left the exact total blank, listing the estimated budget as to be determined based on final headcount and specific vendor selections. However, the actual binding numbers, the payment terms, and the authorization for the letter of credit were buried in an encrypted addendum. This addendum explicitly granted Oakwood the legal authority to execute a scheduled auto draft wire transfer against my father's home equity line of credit. My parents had opened that line of credit a decade ago to remodel their kitchen and fund Connor's brief, ill-fated attempt at starting a sneaker resale business. It was a substantial asset tied directly to the value of their suburban home. By signing the addendum, my father would unknowingly authorize the venue to pull the final balance directly from that account exactly 48 hours before the gala. If the funds were insufficient, the venue retained the right to place a mechanical lien on the property. I uploaded the documents to a secure client portal. This software is a standard tool in my industry. It tracks user engagement. It records the exact moment a document is opened, how long it is viewed, and when a digital signature is applied. It creates an undeniable chronological record of consent. I sent the link to my father's email on a Tuesday afternoon. I included a brief, cheerful note. "Hi, Dad. Here is the initial venue agreement to secure our date at Oakwood. It is mostly standard liability waivers regarding noise and guest conduct. The budget is still fluid depending on your final menu choices, so I left that section blank for now. Please review and sign so we can lock in the ballroom." I hit send. Then I opened the analytics dashboard on my second monitor and waited. My father is a man who believes he is the smartest person in any room. He is a mid-level insurance manager who assumes his brief exposure to corporate policies makes him an expert in all legal matters. He believes reading the fine print is a task for subordinates. He operates on the assumption that his own daughter would never possess the intellect or the audacity to outmaneuver him. The dashboard pinged. Richard Carver had opened the email. I watched the digital timestamps tick across my screen. The portal indicated he had accessed the main master services agreement. He scrolled through 20 pages of text in less than 8 seconds. He did not read a single paragraph about indemnification or cancellation policies. He reached the signature page. He clicked the box, confirming he had read and understood all associated addendums. He did not open the encrypted addendum. He did not look at the letter of credit authorization. He did not see the clause explicitly linking the final payment to his home equity account. He clicked Accept All. The entire process from opening the email to applying his legally binding digital signature took exactly 14 seconds. I exhaled slowly. The tension that had been knotting my shoulders since the Sunday dinner finally released. I downloaded the executed documents and saved them to a dedicated, encrypted folder on my hard drive. He had done it. He had legally authorized a massive financial trigger, and he was completely blind to the reality of what he had just signed. He thought he was securing a ballroom for a party he expected me to finance. In reality, he had just handed a premier country club the keys to his financial stability. The trap was set. It was ironclad, backed by his own verified IP address and digital signature. The countdown clock had started ticking toward that 48-hour auto draft window. I spent the next several weeks orchestrating the event with cold precision. I booked the best catering package Oakwood offered. I selected dry-aged filet mignon and truffle risotto. I ordered top-shelf liquor for the open bar. I hired a specialized lighting crew to spotlight the podium where my father planned to announce his new consulting firm. I made sure every detail screamed luxury and exclusivity. Whenever my parents called to check on the progress, they did not ask about the cost. They only asked about the aesthetics. My mother wanted to know if the linens were real silk. My father wanted to ensure the valet service could handle 200 luxury vehicles. I assured them everything was being handled to the highest standard. I was building a masterpiece of an event, a flawless, glittering gala that would cost roughly $81,000. Every extravagant choice they demanded was simply added to the final invoice, waiting silently in the encrypted addendum. While I was finalizing the seating charts and coordinating floral deliveries, my own personal life was reaching a significant milestone. I was preparing to celebrate an achievement I had worked toward for years. I thought perhaps just this once my family might show up to acknowledge my success without turning the spotlight back onto my brother. That fragile hope was about to be obliterated by an announcement that would prove exactly how deep their delusion ran. 3 months prior to the Oakwood Country Club event, my personal life reached a significant milestone. I closed on my first home. It was a beautiful, historic condominium located in the heart of Chicago. The space featured exposed brick walls, soaring ceilings, and original hardwood floors that creaked slightly underfoot. I secured the 30-year mortgage entirely on my own merit. There were no parental co-signers and no gifted down payments. I earned every square foot of that property through years of navigating grueling corporate logistics and saving every spare dollar. Stepping through that front door and turning the deadbolt with my own key provided a profound sense of independence. I wanted to celebrate this victory. I invited my parents and my brother over for a Sunday brunch. I spent 2 entire days preparing for their arrival. I visited a local artisan bakery to source fresh pastries. I baked a complex Gruyere and spinach quiche. I set my new dining table with crisp linen napkins and polished silverware. I arranged fresh-cut tulips in a heavy glass vase. I simply wanted my family to step into my home and acknowledge the secure, stable life I had built from the ground up. The brunch was scheduled to begin at 11 in the morning. I had the coffee brewing and the mimosas chilled. At 11:45, the intercom panel near my front door finally buzzed. I pressed the release button and waited in the entryway. I could hear my father complaining, echoing up the stairwell before his face even appeared. They stepped over my threshold not with congratulations or warm embraces, but with a litany of grievances. My dad rubbed his temples and launched into a tirade about the street parking situation. He claimed he had to circle the block 3 times and feared his leased sedan would suffer damage from careless city drivers. My mother followed close behind him, carrying a cheap bottle of discount wine. She handed it to me without making eye contact and instantly commented on the perceived draft coming from the historic floor-to-ceiling windows. Connor trailed behind them, hand in hand, with his newest girlfriend, Brittany. Brittany was an aspiring lifestyle influencer who treated every environment like a backdrop for her social media feed. She wore oversized designer sunglasses indoors and held a gimbal stabilizer. She spent the first 10 minutes recording the exposed brick and the city view for her followers without uttering a single word of greeting to me. She treated my new home like a rented studio space. Nobody complimented the condominium. Nobody asked about the complex closing process or the details of the neighborhood. We gathered around my dining table. I poured the chilled mimosas and served the warm quiche. The atmosphere felt strained and heavy. I sat at the head of the table, holding my crystal flute. I waited patiently for a lull in my father's ongoing monologue about Chicago parking enforcement. I took a slow breath, preparing to offer a toast. I wanted to commemorate the closing of my mortgage and welcome them to this new chapter of my life. Before the rim of my glass could even reach my lips, my mother picked up her silver fork. She tapped the metal against her crystal glass. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the dining room, halting all conversation. "We have an amazing announcement," she beamed. Her face flushed with genuine excitement. She reached across the table and grabbed Connor's hand. "Richard and I have been talking with Connor and Brittany. Since the retirement gala is going to be such a beautiful gathering of all our friends and family, we decided to make it a dual celebration. Connor is going to be the official DJ for the evening, and even better, he and Brittany are going to use the spotlight to announce their engagement." I froze, holding my glass suspended in the air. I looked at Brittany, who was already angling her phone to record her own coy smile. I looked at my brother, who sat puffing his chest out, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Then I looked at my parents. The sheer magnitude of their deception settled over me like a heavy winter coat. They were not just asking me to fund a corporate launch and a retirement party. They were secretly hijacking the entire evening. They were transforming a high society event into an engagement gala for their unemployed son and his influencer girlfriend, and they expected me to foot the bill for the entire spectacle. My father leaned forward, cutting into his slice of quiche. "Hillary," he said, his tone entirely casual, "you will need to contact the florist on Monday. Brittany has a very specific vision for the proposal photos. We need to upgrade the centerpieces to imported white roses. Make sure they build a floral arch near the podium for the big moment." He delivered the order without a hint of hesitation. He did not ask if the budget could accommodate the sudden change. He did not ask if I minded sharing the spotlight of an event I was actively organizing and presumably financing. It was a flawless, haunting echo of my college graduation day. Once again, my tangible, hard-earned achievements were being eclipsed by Connor-fabricated milestones. My new home, the 30-year mortgage I signed, the rigorous career I built, all of it meant nothing compared to an engagement announcement between two people who did not possess a single reliable source of income. History was repeating itself right in my own dining room. That moment, I did not raise my voice or demand they leave my property. I simply looked at my father's expectant face and my mother beaming smile. I lowered my glass back to the table. I reached for the chilled bottle of champagne resting in the center of the spread. I topped off my mother's glass. Then I topped off my father's glass. I smiled. It was the same hollow, practiced expression I had perfected over the past 5 years. "That sounds like a spectacular plan," I told them, keeping my voice light and even. "I will make sure the floral upgrades are added to the master invoice immediately." They raised their glasses in a cheerful toast to Connor and Brittany. They clinked their flutes together, celebrating their golden boy. They had no idea that every single imported white rose they demanded was just another weight added to the financial anchor already tied around their necks. And 2 days later, when Connor sent me his personal list of exorbitant demands, the real spending spree began. The Tuesday morning following that disastrous Sunday brunch, I sat at my office desk holding a cup of black coffee. My inbox chimed. The notification displayed an email from my brother. He had not sent me a direct email in over 3 years. The subject line read, "Gala Engagement Setup." I set my coffee mug down and opened the message. Connor had not bothered with a greeting. He immediately launched into a bulleted list of demands. He informed me that since he was making his official debut as a professional disc jockey in front of Chicago elite, he could not rely on basic venue speakers. He required a full club-tier setup. She had attached a 5-page document titled Vision Board. Her requirements for the engagement portion of the evening were staggering. She requested a 6-tier champagne tower using vintage coupe glasses. She demanded specialized white uplighting to wash the ballroom walls during the proposal. She also insisted on a dedicated roaming videographer to capture the moment from multiple angles for her social media followers. At the bottom of the email, Connor had typed a single closing sentence. "Dad said you would cover all of this as our engagement gift." I sat back in my ergonomic desk chair and stared at the glowing screen. The sheer scale of their entitlement was breathtaking. They were expecting me to finance a luxury wedding proposal disguised as a retirement party. My father had casually volunteered my bank account to fund his golden boy latest delusion. 5 years ago, I might have cried. I might have called my mother to argue, pleading for some semblance of fairness or basic respect. That morning, I felt nothing but a cold, calculating focus. The Carver family operated under the assumption that event planning was just a matter of swiping a credit card. They lacked any understanding of corporate logistics. High-end establishments like the Oakwood Country Club operate on strict liability protocols. An outside vendor cannot simply walk into a luxury ballroom and plug industrial subwoofers into their electrical grid. The venue requires a certificate of insurance. This document proves the vendor carries at least $1 million in general liability coverage. Connor did not possess a registered business license, let alone an active commercial insurance policy. He was an unemployed 24-year-old living in a basement. If he blew a circuit or damaged the historic Oakwood dance floor, the country club would immediately sue the primary guarantors. I could have replied to his email and explained these logistical realities. I could have told him the venue would reject his amateur setup. Instead, I chose to be flawlessly compliant. I decided to give my brother and my father exactly what they asked for. I picked up my office phone and dialed the high-end audio rental company Connor had linked in his email. I introduced myself using my corporate title. I informed the rental manager that I was organizing a private event at Oakwood and needed to secure the Pioneer equipment package for a guest performer. The manager was thrilled to secure the booking, but he quickly brought up the security collateral. Renting $6,000 worth of delicate audio equipment requires a substantial hold. The manager explained they needed to place a $10,000 authorization on a major credit card to cover any potential damages, blown speakers, or delayed returns. This was the perfect opportunity to tighten the snare. Several weeks prior, my father had provided me with the numbers for his primary platinum credit card. He told me to keep it on file for what he called minor incidentals, like upgraded napkins or specialized seating cards. He assumed the charges would be trivial. I read his credit card number to the audio rental manager. I instructed the company to list Connor Carver as the primary equipment operator. This would stroke my brother's fragile ego, making him feel like a true professional. However, I explicitly tied the $10,000 damage deposit to Richard Carver Platinum Card. If Connor spilled a drink on the mixing console, my father would bear the financial penalty. If Connor blew a subwoofer trying to impress his girlfriend, the rental company would instantly convert that authorization hold into a permanent charge. My brother was now holding a financial grenade, and the pin was attached directly to my father's wallet. After finalizing the audio equipment, I turned my attention to Brittany's extravagant vision board. I drafted an email to the Oakwood event coordinator. I requested the immediate addition of the 6-tier vintage champagne tower. I approved the specialized white uplighting package for the ballroom perimeter. I reached out to a premium videography firm that frequently partnered with my logistics company and booked their top roaming cameraman for a 4-hour block. I did not pay for a single item using my own funds. I funneled every single request through the country club internal billing system. I logged into the secure client portal. I opened the encrypted master addendum that my father had blindly signed weeks ago. I watched the numbers climb. The original catering and venue cost sat at roughly $50,000. With the imported white roses, the audio equipment, the champagne tower, the specialized lighting, and the videographer, the total budget swelled rapidly. I updated the ledger. The new balance, due 48 hours before the event, reached an agonizing $81,000. Every extravagant demand they made added more weight to the anvil dangling over their heads. They thought they were taking advantage of a wealthy, successful daughter. They believed they had successfully manipulated me into funding their dreams. In reality, they were building their own execution block, brick by brick. I closed the billing portal and sent a brief, cheerful reply to Connor. I told him everything was booked. I assured him the equipment would be waiting for him at the venue and that Brittany Vision Board was being executed flawlessly. He replied 3 minutes later with a single thumbs-up emoji. No thank you, no gratitude, just a digital gesture of expected compliance. I spent the next 2 months managing my demanding corporate job while simultaneously orchestrating their phantom gala. The sheer volume of work was punishing. I was coordinating international freight logistics for my actual clients during the day and reviewing Oakwood catering schematics at night. Carrying the weight of this secret began to take a toll on my body. The human nervous system is not designed to sustain that level of suppressed adrenaline for months on end. I was operating on 4 hours of sleep a night. I skipped meals. I drank too much caffeine. I was pushing myself to the absolute physical limit to ensure every detail of the trap was legally unassailable. The stress of maintaining the illusion of the dutiful daughter while meticulously plotting their financial ruin was draining my immune system. I ignored the persistent ache in my joints. I ignored the scratchiness in my throat. I told myself I just needed to survive until the weekend of the retirement party. But biology does not care about corporate timelines or family revenge plots. Just 5 days before the 200 guests were scheduled to arrive at the country club, my body finally surrendered. A minor symptom rapidly spiraled into a severe medical crisis, forcing me into a situation that would reveal the final, unforgivable truth about the people who raised me. The relentless pace of managing my corporate responsibilities while simultaneously architecting the $81,000 Phantom Gala finally broke my physical resilience. The human body can only sustain a state of suppressed fury and sleep deprivation for so long before it enforces a mandatory shutdown. Exactly 5 days before the Oakwood Country Club event, I collapsed. I woke up on a Monday morning shivering violently, despite being buried under 2 heavy duvets. My throat felt lined with shattered glass. When I tried to stand, my vision tunneled into darkness, and I collapsed back against the mattress. I managed to locate my digital thermometer. The reading glowed a harsh red, 103 degrees. I called a rideshare service to take me to the nearest urgent care clinic. The attending physician took one look at my pale skin and sunken eyes and immediately transferred me to the emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I was diagnosed with a severe viral infection, complicated by extreme dehydration and exhaustion. The emergency room nurses settled me into a narrow hospital bed. They inserted an intravenous line into the back of my left hand, pumping a steady stream of saline and broad-spectrum antibiotics into my bloodstream. Monitors beeped rhythmically, recording my elevated heart rate and shallow breathing. I lay there, staring at the sterile fluorescent lights, feeling completely hollowed out. Despite the fever haze, the ingrained habits of an event director refused to shut down. The master timeline for the retirement and engagement gala was running on a loop in my head. I knew the luxury bakery required a final delivery window confirmation by 3 in the afternoon. Usually, I handled these calls seamlessly, but my vocal cords were so inflamed I could barely manage a raspy whisper. I reached for my phone resting on the plastic bedside tray. I opened the family group chat. I wanted to believe that facing a legitimate medical emergency might momentarily penetrate their wall of self-absorption. I thought surely seeing their daughter in a hospital bed would prompt a basic display of parental concern. I snapped a photograph of my hand. The image clearly showed the clear tubing of the IV line taped to my bruised skin with the hospital blanket and the heart monitor visible in the background. I typed a brief message. Admitted to the ER with a severe viral infection and dehydration. Fever is very high. I cannot speak right now. Mom, can you please call the Artisan Bakery and confirm the delivery window for Saturday? The number is in the master file. I sent the message. I rested my head against the stiff pillow and closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable flurry of concerned replies. I expected a phone call. I expected them to ask for the hospital address or inquire about my specific diagnosis. 10 minutes passed. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only sound in my cubicle. Then my phone buzzed. It was a single, direct text message. Not in the group chat where relatives might see it, but a private message from my father. I picked up the device. My vision blurred from the fever, forcing me to squint at the bright screen. I read the words. Then I read them again, ensuring the fever was not causing me to hallucinate. Hillary, you are a professional. Stop being dramatic. We are incredibly stressed right now, dealing with Connor custom tuxedo fitting and finalizing the shot list with the engagement photographer. Your mother does not have time to deal with vendor logistics. I was lying in a hospital bed with a needle in my vein, my core temperature dangerously high, and my father was accusing me of theatrics. He dismissed my hospitalization as an inconvenience. He explicitly prioritized his adult son tuxedo fitting over his daughter physical survival. There was no inquiry about my health. There was no offer of assistance. There was only the cold, relentless demand for continued service. It is one thing to suspect that your family values you only for your utility. It is an entirely different experience to see that reality typed out and transmitted directly to your phone while you are hooked up to medical equipment. The message stripped away any remaining illusions. It erased the last lingering trace of guilt I harbored about the financial trap I had set. Your heart rate just spiked significantly, she said, reaching for my wrist to double-check my pulse. Are you in pain? Are you experiencing any chest tightness? What is wrong? I looked at the nurse, then I looked down at the glowing screen of my phone. The anger that had been simmering in my chest for 5 years did not boil over. It froze solid. Every ounce of familial loyalty, every desperate childhood desire to be loved, evaporated into the sterile hospital air. I felt a profound, icy calm settle over my entire body. The master services agreement, the letter of credit, the $81,000 invoice waiting in the encrypted addendum, it was no longer just a reaction. It was an execution order. I carefully unplugged my phone from the charging cable beside the bed. I looked up at the nurse, offering her a weak but genuine smile. Nothing, I whispered, my voice raspy and broken. Everything is finally perfectly clear. The nurse adjusted my IV drip and advised me to try and sleep. As soon as she pulled the curtain closed, I opened my email application. I spent the next 48 hours recovering in that hospital bed. The antibiotics did their job, and the fever slowly broke. While my body healed, my mind remained focused with lethal precision. I reviewed every clause of the Oakwood Country Club contract on my phone. I verified the auto draft schedule. I confirmed the delivery protocols for the master binder. I was discharged on Wednesday afternoon, 2 days before the Phantom Gala. I took a rideshare back to my condominium. I did not call my parents to tell them I was home. I did not update them on my medical status. I simply packed a small, elegant weekend bag. I packed my plush robe, my luxury skincare products, and the outfit I planned to wear to my upcoming spa appointments. The mechanism I had built was fully automated now. The venue billing system was primed. The vendors were scheduled. The trap was about to spring, and I had absolutely no intention of being anywhere near the fallout zone. I was preparing to hand over the detonator and vanish into the Wisconsin countryside. 48. The fever had broken, leaving me physically weak, but mentally sharper than ever. I had my laptop open, monitoring the internal venue billing portal. At 9:01, the Oakwood automated accounting system initiated the wire transfer. The system was programmed to pull the final balance directly against the letter of credit my father had authorized weeks earlier. The total invoice had swelled to exactly $81,420. My father's standard checking account did not hold anywhere near that amount of liquid cash. He was a mid-level insurance manager who lived comfortably but not extravagantly. When the Oakwood system attempted to draft the funds from his primary account, the request failed instantly. This is where the encrypted addendum he had blindly signed proved its lethal efficiency. The contract stipulated that upon failure of the primary account, the venue possessed the legal authority to execute the draft against the secondary guaranteed asset. That asset was his home equity line of credit. The Oakwood system automatically rerouted the charge and slammed into the HELOC. This type of sudden, massive withdrawal triggers immediate security protocols at any major financial institution. My father bank flagged the $81,000 transfer as a high-risk anomaly. Because the HELOC was tied to the equity of his suburban home, the bank algorithms reacted aggressively to protect the asset. They initiated an emergency freeze on the transfer, citing insufficient liquid collateral and suspected fraud. The transfer stalled in a pending status. The Oakwood accounting system registered the failure and automatically generated a breach of contract notification. Furthermore, the bank did not just freeze the equity line. As a standard security measure, they locked down my father's primary checking and savings accounts and suspended his Platinum credit card until the irregular activity could be verified. My father was completely unaware. He was a man who only checked his bank statements at the end of the month. On that Thursday morning, he was likely sitting in a tailor shop, adjusting the cuffs on his bespoke suit, or reviewing the speech he planned to deliver to his prospective consulting clients. He had no idea his entire financial foundation had just been paralyzed. I watched the red failure notifications populate on the Oakwood portal. The trap had sprung exactly as designed. The anvil had dropped. I closed my laptop. It was time to execute the final phase of the handover. I did not drive to the suburbs to deliver the paperwork in person. I had zero desire to engage in a face-to-face confrontation or endure my mother complaining about the floral arrangements. I wanted distance. I needed the detonation to occur while I was completely unreachable. I retrieved a thick, leather-bound binder from my home office. This was the master run of show. It contained every timeline, every vendor contact, and every seating chart for the 200 guests. It also contained the lethal documents I had been guarding for months. I slid the encrypted addendum featuring my father's digital signature into the front pocket. Behind it, I placed the printed notification of the failed wire transfer from the Oakwood billing system. I included the equipment rental agreement demonstrating the $10,000 liability hold on his frozen credit card for Connor audio setup. Finally, I included the vendor ultimatums, clearly stating that services would be halted if the balance was not settled in cash by 2 p.m. on the day of the event. I placed the master binder into a heavy cardboard shipping box. I sealed it with industrial packing tape. I contacted a high-end luxury courier service. These are not standard postal workers. They are bonded professionals who specialize in delivering sensitive legal and corporate documents. I paid a premium to ensure a specific, highly controlled delivery protocol. I instructed the courier to deliver the sealed box directly to the Oakwood Country Club event manager. I scheduled the drop-off for exactly 10 a.m. on Saturday, the day of the gala. I required a strict signature upon receipt, ensuring a documented chain of custody. With the courier dispatched, my obligations were officially terminated. I was no longer the reliable fixer. I was no longer the silent bank. I was simply a woman taking a much-needed vacation. I packed an elegant weekend bag. I packed my plush spa robe, my luxury skincare products, and several comfortable outfits. I left the condominium and drove my car onto the interstate, heading north toward Wisconsin. The drive took 3 hours. The landscape shifted from dense urban gridlock to open highways bordered by dense pine forests. I checked into a secluded luxury spa resort situated on the edge of a pristine glacial lake. The facility was designed for absolute tranquility, featuring no cell service in the main lobby and strict policies against digital disturbances. I was shown to a private suite with a balcony overlooking the water. The room smelled of eucalyptus and cedar. I unpacked my bag, hung my robe in the closet, and ordered room service. I requested a light salad and a pot of chamomile tea. I sat on the balcony watching the mist roll off the lake. 200 miles south, my family was finalizing their wardrobe choices and practicing their engagement toasts, entirely ignorant of the financial bomb ticking down in their own bank accounts. I did not feel anxious. I did not feel guilty. I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. I ate my dinner, took a hot shower, and went to sleep before 9 p.m. I slept undisturbed through the night while the mechanism I built continued its silent, devastating countdown. The next day, Friday, passed without incident. I attended a yoga class, booked a facial, and read a novel by the indoor pool. My phone remained silent in my suite. The venue would not officially demand the funds until Saturday afternoon. The bank would not notify my father of the freeze until he attempted to use a card. The illusion was still intact. But Saturday morning arrived. The deadline loomed. The courier was en route to the country club, and the final confrontation, the moment the truth would obliterate their perfect facade, was only hours away. Saturday morning broke over the Wisconsin wilderness with a crisp, biting cold. The digital clock on the nightstand beside my hotel bed flipped to 8:14. I stepped out onto the private balcony of my suite, wearing a thick, plush robe. The air smelled of damp pine needles and fresh water. My fever had vanished, leaving behind a profound, crystalline clarity. I poured a fresh mimosa from the silver room service tray and settled into a wicker lounge chair. 200 miles to the south, The city of Chicago was already buzzing with the frantic energy of the weekend. My mobile device, resting on the glass table, vibrated. A bright notification illuminated the screen. It was a direct message from my father. I picked up the phone and read his words. "Make sure you are at the venue by noon to set up Connor DJ booth. Do not be late." I stared at the command. It was a masterpiece of unchecked arrogance. Today was the day of his extravagant retirement gala and his high-stakes corporate launch. Yet his primary concern was ensuring his daughter arrived early to perform manual labor for his unemployed son. He did not ask how my recovery was progressing after my recent hospital discharge. He did not offer a single word of gratitude for the months of rigorous event planning I had supposedly financed. He simply issued a directive expecting immediate, unquestioning compliance. He still viewed me as the obedient workhorse. He thought I was the silent fixer who existed solely to smooth the path for his golden boy. He expected me to haul heavy audio equipment across a luxury ballroom while nursing the remnants of a severe viral infection, just so Connor could pretend to be a professional entertainer for the evening. 30 seconds later, a second notification appeared. This one originated from the secure logistics application tracking my luxury courier. The status bar shifted from a pending yellow to a solid, striking red. Delivered. I opened the application and reviewed the digital manifest. The bonded courier had walked through the polished brass doors of the Oakwood Country Club at exactly 8:15. He handed the sealed cardboard box directly to the head event manager. The manager had signed the electronic ledger confirming receipt of the master binder. The handover was officially complete. The venue now possessed the unredacted truth. I closed my eyes and visualized the exact sequence unfolding in the Oakwood finance office. The manager was breaking the seal on the cardboard box right now. She was pulling out the heavy leather folder. She was discovering the failed $81,000 wire transfer notice, printed on stark white paper. She was reading the bank rejection codes and realizing the letter of credit tied to Richard Carver had bounced due to insufficient funds. The mechanism I had meticulously engineered over the past 7 months was locked into place. There was no reversing the process. It was time to deliver the final communication. I stood up from the wicker chair and walked back into the warmth of the suite. I unzipped my leather weekend bag and retrieved an item I had carefully packed between layers of cashmere sweaters. It was a cheap wooden frame holding a piece of heavy parchment paper. My college diploma. The exact same academic degree my parents had deemed less important than a dusty amateur soccer game 5 years ago. I carried the framed degree out to the balcony. I propped it up against the silver room service tray, allowing the morning sunlight to catch the gold foil seal. I placed my crystal mimosa glass right next to the dark wood trim. I adjusted the collar of my plush robe and framed the shot using my phone camera. The composition was flawless. It captured the tranquil glacial lake in the background, the elegant breakfast spread, the celebratory drink, and the ultimate symbol of their original betrayal. I snapped the photograph. I opened the messaging application and navigated to the Carver family group chat. My mother, father, and brother were all active in the thread, likely discussing wardrobe choices and timeline logistics. I attached the high-resolution image of my diploma and the mimosa. Below the photograph, I typed the exact sequence of words I had been refining in my mind for half a decade. I did not write a lengthy, emotional paragraph. I did not demand apologies or list their endless grievances. I delivered pure, tactical facts. I figured out the cake. The $81,000 auto draft bounced, and your accounts are frozen. The venue requires cash by 2 p.m. Enjoy the regional semifinals of your retirement. I reviewed the text one last time. Every sentence was a distinct, calculated strike designed to dismantle their reality. The opening line referenced the cruel text my father had sent, demanding I figure out the bakery logistics while hooked to an intravenous drip. The second sentence shattered their financial delusion, informing them of the locked banking assets and the failed draft. The third sentence established the impending, unmovable deadline set by the country club. The final line was the echo of 5 years ago, returning the exact phrase my father used to dismiss my college graduation. I pressed send. The message transmitted instantly. I sat on the balcony and watched the delivery status indicators. A tiny gray check mark appeared, confirming the transmission. Moments later, the check marks turned blue, indicating the message had been opened. First, my father read the text. 2 seconds later, my mother opened the thread. Finally, Connor viewed the image. I could almost feel the atmospheric pressure drop in the Chicago suburbs. I could visualize the precise sequence of their reactions, the initial confusion, the squinting at the photograph, the slow, horrifying realization as they checked their banking applications and discovered the red security alerts confirming the frozen assets. The panic that would inevitably erupt as they realized the daughter they had exploited for years had just orchestrated their financial ruin. My device began to vibrate in my palm. The screen flashed, displaying an incoming video call from Richard Carver. I did not answer. I watched his name pulse on the bright screen for 3 full rings. The most effective weapon you can wield against people who thrive on control is silence. By denying them access, I stripped away their ability to manipulate, argue, or demand a solution. They were entirely on their own, facing a catastrophe they had legally authored. I pressed the power button, holding it down until the screen faded to black. I slipped the dead device into the deep pocket of my robe. I gathered my room service key and walked out of the suite. I descended the carpeted staircase to the tranquil lobby of the spa. The air here was scented with lavender, and the sound of a distant waterfall echoed through the stone corridors. I approached the mahogany concierge desk. A polite attendant wearing a crisp uniform smiled warmly at me. "Good morning, Ms. Beatrix," she greeted. "How can we assist you today?" I withdrew the powered-down mobile device from my pocket and placed it on the polished wood counter. "I would like to utilize the digital detox safe I requested upon booking. Please lock this away until Sunday morning. Under no circumstances do I want it returned to me before then." The attendant nodded, seamlessly placing the device into a velvet-lined lockbox and turning the heavy brass key. "Certainly, enjoy your uninterrupted peace." I thanked her and turned toward the wellness wing. I had a 90-minute hot stone massage scheduled for 9 in the morning. As I walked down the dimly lit hallway, listening to the soothing ambient music, my shoulders dropped. The chronic tension that had lived in my muscles since I first drafted that Oakwood contract began to melt away. I lay face down on the heated massage table, closing my eyes as the therapist placed smooth, warm basalt stones along my spine. I took a deep, cleansing breath, letting the quiet environment wash over me. While I drifted into a state of profound physical relaxation, the clock continued to tick. The morning was rapidly slipping away. 200 miles south, the true nightmare was just beginning to unfold. My father was scrambling to find liquid funds that no longer existed. My mother was likely dissolving into hysterics, tearing through her closet for an outfit she could no longer afford to wear. And at the Oakwood Country Club, an uncompromising event manager was standing by the loading dock holding a clipboard. She was preparing to enforce the afternoon deadline that would bring the Carver family to their knees. The countdown to 2 o'clock had officially started. I remained disconnected from the world, breathing in the herbal steam of the spa sauna. The details of that fateful Saturday unfolded exactly as I had modeled them in my corporate spreadsheets. I learned the precise chronological breakdown of their ruin 3 days later over a long lunch with Melissa. She is the head event director at Oakwood Country Club. She is a woman who has spent 2 decades managing the delicate egos of Chicago elite. She possesses a spine made of titanium and zero tolerance for delinquent clients. She relayed the Carver family collapse to me with the detached precision of a forensic accountant. At 10 in the morning, my father had finished reading my text message. According to his subsequent panicked voicemails left on my dormant work phone, he immediately dialed his priority banking concierge. He bypassed the automated prompts demanding to speak with a risk management supervisor. The representative on the other end of the line delivered the fatal blow. They informed Richard Carver that his home equity line of credit had been frozen due to a triggered draft exceeding liquid limits. Because the accounts were cross-collateralized, the security algorithm had initiated a comprehensive lockdown. His platinum cards, his checking reserves, and his emergency savings were entirely inaccessible. He possessed zero purchasing power. He spent the next 3 hours pacing the length of his suburban living room, shouting into his mobile device, trying to secure a short-term bridge loan. It was Saturday. Traditional lending institutions were closed. Wire transfers could not be authorized. The rigid infrastructure of the banking system offered no loopholes for a man who had mortgaged his future to fund a phantom gala. At 2 in the afternoon, the Carver family vehicle pulled into the sweeping circular driveway of the Oakwood estate. A uniformed valet opened the doors. My parents stepped out dressed in their early evening casual attire, anticipating a relaxing afternoon of overseeing the final floral placements. Connor and Brittany followed closely behind, carrying garment bags holding their bespoke evening wear. They walked through the polished brass doors into the grand foyer. They expected to be greeted with chilled champagne and obsequious smiles. Instead, Melissa stood waiting on the checkered marble floor. She was flanked by the head of catering and the facility's security director. She held the thick leather master binder I had shipped via courier. She did not smile. She did not offer a welcoming greeting. She operated with the chilling efficiency of a collection agent. "Mr. Carver," Melissa said, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous foyer. "We have a critical billing failure. The letter of credit you authorized bounced this morning. We require the final $81,420 balance cleared immediately in cash or certified funds before my staff unloads a single piece of equipment." My father flushed a deep crimson. He attempted to deploy his usual tactic of charming condescension. He offered a practiced chuckle, smoothing the lapels of his jacket. He told Melissa there was simply a minor banking error, a small misunderstanding orchestrated by his daughter. He promised the funds would clear on Monday morning. Melissa opened the binder and tapped a manicured fingernail against the encrypted addendum featuring his digital signature. "Oakwood does not extend credit on the day of an event," she stated firmly. "Your signature guarantees the funds today." Without payment, the ballroom remains dark. Desperation breached his confident facade. My father pulled his leather wallet from his interior pocket. He retrieved his pristine platinum credit card, praying the bank representative had been mistaken or that the freeze had lifted. He handed the plastic to Melissa. She swiped it through the mobile terminal she carried on her clipboard. The machine emitted a sharp red glow and a harsh error tone. Declined. He handed her a second card, a standard gold rewards account. Melissa swiped it. The machine chimed again. Declined. The daily limits on his secondary accounts were maxed out by the cascading effects of the equity freeze. He stood in the opulent lobby of the most prestigious country club in the state, handing over pieces of useless plastic, while the staff watched in stony silence. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed the half hour. It was 2:30. Melissa looked at her watch and gave a sharp nod to the catering director. The grace period had expired. The vast logistical machinery of the Oakwood Country Club ground to a definitive halt. Out on the loading docks, the refrigerated box trucks containing the dry-aged steaks and the fresh seafood lowered their hydraulic lift gates and locked their doors. The artisan bakery delivery van turned around in the parking lot and drove away, taking the 5-tier cake with them. In the grand ballroom, the florist stopped constructing the imported white rose arch Brittany had demanded for her proposal. They gathered their pruning shears, packed the pristine blooms back into protective boxes, and exited through the service corridors. By 3:30, the grand ballroom looked like an abandoned warehouse. The magnificent space was stripped bare. The round banquet tables sat exposed, revealing scarred plywood tops lacking any luxury linens or crystal centerpieces. The silver chafing dishes were gone. The stage was empty. In the midst of this escalating nightmare, Connor attempted to salvage his shattered ego. He decided to ignore the financial collapse unfolding around him and focus on his disc jockey debut. He walked up to the bare wooden stage where the premium audio rental company had dropped off the Pioneer equipment crates earlier that morning. The audio technician was standing by the crates, waiting for his final clearance to begin wiring the setup. Connor brushed past the technician, grabbing the heavy handles of a professional-grade monitor speaker. He wanted to look capable. He wanted to prove he belonged on that stage. He lifted the 50-pound speaker unit. His grip slipped on the smooth casing. He fumbled, trying to catch the heavy equipment against his chest. He failed. The speaker plummeted to the hardwood floor with a deafening crack. The protective grille dented inward. The internal cones shattered. The impact echoed through the cavernous, empty ballroom, drawing the attention of everyone in the vicinity. The audio technician rushed forward, inspecting the ruined equipment. His face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "That unit cost $3,000, the technician shouted, pointing at the broken casing. "I am running the security deposit authorization right now." The technician pulled out a mobile reader and initiated the $10,000 hold I had tethered to my Father Platinum card. The transaction bounced instantly, just like the venue payments. The technician looked up from his screen, his expression darkening. "The card is locked," he announced loudly. "You destroyed my property and you have no collateral. I am calling the local precinct to file a formal police report for property damage." Brittany let out a high-pitched shriek, dropping her designer handbag. My mother covered her face with her hands, letting out a low, humiliated sob. My father stood in the center of the vast, empty ballroom. He was physically sweating. Dark patches bloomed under the arms of his tailored shirt. He looked at the bare plywood tables. He looked at the furious audio technician dialing the police. He looked at his 24-year-old golden boy, who stood on the stage, staring blankly at the broken speaker, entirely useless and utterly incapable of fixing the disaster he had just caused. Richard Carver was a man who had spent his entire life valuing appearances above all else. He had traded his daughter loyalty for his son athletic hobbies. He had demanded a $50,000 launch pad for his own ego, expecting someone else to carry the financial burden. Now the bill had come due. He checked his luxury wristwatch. The hands ticked closer to 4 o'clock. In exactly 2 hours, 200 of the most powerful corporate executives in Chicago would begin walking through those polished brass doors, expecting a gala. They were going to find an empty room, a shattered speaker, and a man who could not afford to buy them a glass of tap water. The void was waiting for him. At 6 p.m, the first luxury vehicles began pulling into the Oakwood Country Club driveway. Uniformed valets rushed to open the doors of imported sedans and sleek sports cars. 200 guests stepped out into the crisp evening air. These were not simply casual friends or neighborhood acquaintances. They were regional directors, senior underwriters, and wealth managers. This demographic represented the exact high-net-worth clientele my father intended to court for his new private insurance consulting firm. They wore tailored evening gowns and bespoke dinner jackets, expecting a night of unparalleled luxury and professional networking. The guests walked through the grand foyer, handing their heavy wool overcoats to the cloakroom attendants. They moved toward the main ballroom, expecting to hear the soft, elegant notes of a string quartet and smell the rich aroma of dry-aged steak. Instead, they walked into a cavernous void. The ballroom was a monument to failure. The round banquet table sat exposed, revealing scarred plywood surfaces lacking any fine linens. The silver chafing dishes were absent, leaving the long buffet stations entirely bare. The ambient lighting remained harsh and bright because the specialized uplighting crew had packed up their expensive gear hours ago. The silence in the room was heavy and unnatural, lacking the hum of clinking glasses and polite conversation. My parents were forced to stand near the main entrance. They had nowhere to hide from the incoming crowd. My mother wore a designer silk dress that now looked absurd against the backdrop of an empty, echoing room. She clutched her evening bag with white knuckles, her face pale and drawn. My father stood beside her, attempting to project confidence, but his rigid posture betrayed his internal panic. He was perspiring heavily through his tailored shirt. He offered stiff handshakes and forced smiles, trying to welcome industry titans into a space that looked like an abandoned warehouse. A prominent figure in the Chicago insurance sector approached my parents. Harrison Caldwell was the chief executive of a major underwriting firm. His endorsement alone could have launched my father new business overnight. Harrison stopped a few feet from the entrance, surveying the barren tables and the silent stage. He turned to my father, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. Richard Harrison said, his deep voice carrying easily across the quiet room, "Is there a delay with the catering staff? Where is the food? Where is the entertainment?" My father saw his entire professional future dissolving in front of him. Cornered and desperate, he resorted to his most practiced defense mechanism. He lied. He decided to sacrifice my reputation to salvage his own ego. He leaned in close to Harrison, but kept his voice loud enough for the surrounding executives to hear. "It is a tragedy, Harrison," my father said, projecting a tone of weary heartbreak. "My daughter Hillary was supposed to handle all the logistics. Unfortunately, she suffered a severe mental breakdown this morning. She abandoned her duties and stole the event funds. We are dealing with a terrible family crisis. It was a calculated performance designed to elicit sympathy." He thought he could spin the narrative and play the victim, just like he always did. He forgot one crucial detail. He was standing in a venue managed by Melissa. Melissa was standing near the service doors, observing the interaction. As the head event director, her primary responsibility is protecting the flawless reputation of the Oakwood Country Club. She could not allow a delinquent client to slander her vendors or blame her prestigious venue for his own financial insolvency. She stepped forward, clipping her radio to her belt. She walked purposefully toward the small wooden podium situated near the entrance. She tapped the microphone. The sharp feedback echoed through the silent ballroom, causing several guests to flinch and turn their attention toward the stage. "Excuse me," Melissa announced. Her voice was clear, authoritative, and entirely devoid of sympathy. She looked directly at Harrison Caldwell and then swept her gaze across the crowd of wealthy executives. "I need to correct a statement that was just made regarding the Oakwood Country Club and our contracting policies," Melissa continued. "Your host daughter did not steal any funds. She acted merely as a consulting agent. The services for tonight were halted for one very simple reason." Mr. Carver's personal checks bounced. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of executives. My father, face turns the color of ash. Melissa did not stop. She opened the heavy leather binder resting on the podium. Mr. Carver signed legally binding contracts guaranteeing payment for this evening. Earlier today, his letter of credit failed due to insufficient liquid funds. His accounts are frozen, and he breached his agreements. We do not provide charity events for individuals who cannot afford to pay their vendors. Thank you for your understanding, and we apologize for Mr. Carver wasting your evening. The silence that followed was suffocating. 200 of the most powerful corporate figures in the city stared at my father. They did not see a successful consultant ready to manage their portfolios. They saw a fraud. They saw a man who wrote bad checks and tried to blame his own child for his bankruptcy. The professional credibility my father had spent 3 decades building evaporated into the cold air. Before the executives could even begin to turn toward the exit, a new sound pierced the quiet room. A high-pitched shriek erupted from the center of the dance floor. It was Brittany. She had spent the last 2 hours hiding in the bridal suite, waiting for the caterers to miraculously return. She had worn a custom white gown, expecting a 6-tier champagne tower and a professional videographer to capture her perfect proposal. Hearing Melissa announce the truth shattered her influencer fantasy. She realized there would be no viral video. There would be no imported white roses. She was standing in an empty room with a broke family. Brittany stomped her designer heels against the hardwood floor. She turned toward Connor, who was standing near the broken audio equipment looking bewildered and small. "You are a loser," she screamed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You told me your family was wealthy. You told me I was getting a luxury engagement. You do not even have a job. You live in a basement." Connor raised his hands, trying to pacify her. "Brittany, lower your voice," he pleaded. "People are watching us." "I want them to watch," Brittany shrieked, throwing her expensive clutch purse across the room. It struck a plywood table and scattered her cosmetics across the floor. "You are a joke. Your parents are broke liars. I am not marrying into a family of failures." She turned her wrath toward my mother and father. She insulted their home, their clothes, and their social status. She degraded them in front of the exact people my father desperately wanted to impress. My mother began to weep openly, burying her face in her hands. My father stood paralyzed, unable to silence the screaming woman who was dismantling his golden boy. The affluent guests did not offer comfort. They did not step forward to intervene or offer pity. They simply turned around in quiet disgust. Harrison Caldwell shook his head, pulling his overcoat tight, and walked out the brass doors without saying another word. The rest of the executives followed his lead. A steady stream of Chicago elite filed out of the ballroom, leaving the Carver family standing alone in the wreckage of their own entitlement. The social execution was flawless. The Phantom Gala had served its ultimate purpose, exposing their deceit to the exact audience they valued most. But the devastation did not end when the luxury cars drove away from the country club. The public humiliation was merely the visible surface of the disaster. The true punishment, the permanent structural damage to their lives, was waiting for them on Monday morning when the financial institutions opened their doors and the legal consequences of their breached contracts came due. I retrieved my mobile device from the spa concierge safe on Sunday morning after a final, leisurely breakfast overlooking the lake. The velvet box opened with a soft click, yielding the cold metal device. I carried the powered-down phone back to my suite and sat on the edge of the freshly made bed. I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated, and the device immediately began vibrating continuously against my palm. It took several full minutes for the operating system to process the sheer volume of incoming notifications. I had 150 missed calls. The voicemail inbox was completely full, preventing any further recordings. The text messages were a barrage of escalating panic and rage. My father had cycled through begging, demanding, threatening, and finally promising absolute legal retribution. I listened to exactly one voicemail message. His voice was ragged and hoarse from shouting. He vowed to destroy me in civil court. He promised to sue me for fraud, theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I deleted the message, cleared the notification banner, and went downstairs to check out of the resort. I drove back to Chicago feeling remarkably serene. On Monday morning, Richard Carver attempted to execute his threat. He walked into the reception area of a prominent civil litigation firm in downtown Chicago, expecting to unleash a legal nightmare upon his daughter. He sat across from an intake paralegal in a glass-walled conference room and spun a tale of a manipulative child who had forged financial documents and stolen his retirement celebration. He demanded the firm file an emergency injunction and a lawsuit for fraudulent inducement. The paralegal calmly asked to review the digital contracts. My father handed over his laptop displaying the Oakwood Country Club agreements. The legal professional read the master services agreement. Then she opened the encrypted addendum. She checked the digital signature verification logs and the chronological timestamps. She looked at my father and slowly shook her head. The paper trail I had constructed was entirely bulletproof. The portal analytics proved unequivocally that he had accessed the document from his own residential Internet Protocol address. He had checked the acceptance box using his personal computer. There was no forgery and there was no hidden fraud. There was only an arrogant man who failed to read the terms and conditions before legally binding his own assets. The law firm officially declined to take his case. They informed him he possessed zero legal standing and strongly advised him to pay the venue immediately before the country club initiated collection proceedings against his home. The legal rejection was merely the beginning of his reckoning. The true destruction occurred within the boardrooms and corner offices of the Chicago insurance sector. The 200 executives who had witnessed the bounced check spectacle at the country club returned to their desks on Monday morning. In the corporate finance world, reputation is the only currency that truly matters. Whispers travel through email chains and private phone calls with astonishing speed. By Tuesday afternoon, the narrative was permanently cemented. Richard Carver was not a reliable or trustworthy consultant. He was a financial liability who wrote bad checks, breached high-level contracts, and humiliated himself in front of his peers. The soft launch of his private consulting firm was dead on arrival. Associates he had known for decades suddenly stopped answering his calls. Prospective clients canceled their introductory meetings, citing unforeseen scheduling conflicts. Harrison Caldwell, the chief executive, whose endorsement my father desperately needed, sent a polite but firm message, officially declining any future business partnerships. My father's professional credibility, carefully cultivated over 30 years of networking, was annihilated in a single evening. With his lucrative consulting prospects ruined, my father had to face the immediate, agonizing financial penalties of his arrogance. The Oakwood Country Club did not offer sympathetic payment plans. They demanded the $81,000 plus thousands more in strict breach of contract penalties. Because the venue had placed a hard hold on his home equity line of credit, the bank was actively threatening to initiate foreclosure proceedings if the negative balance was not resolved within 10 business days. My parents were trapped in a fiscal vice of their own making. To save their suburban house, they had to secure liquid cash immediately. They were forced to contact their wealth advisors and liquidate a substantial portion of their actual retirement portfolios. Pulling those funds decades before the legal maturation date triggered exorbitant early withdrawal penalties and brutal federal tax liabilities. To satisfy the venue debt, they had to drain nearly double the required amount from their savings just to cover the tax burden. Their comfortable early retirement transformed overnight into a terrifying reality of restricted budgets and vanishing safety nets. They became social pariahs in their own community, avoiding their neighbors and skipping their usual Sunday dinners at the local bistro. The financial devastation cascaded downward, landing squarely on the shoulders of the golden boy. Connor awoke on Sunday morning to discover his status as a wealthy heir apparent had permanently evaporated. Brittany, the aspiring influencer, wasted no time severing ties with the sinking ship. She did not break up with him privately or offer any grace. She posted a tearful, highly edited video to her social media channels on Sunday afternoon. She informed her followers that she had survived a toxic situation involving a family built on lies and fake wealth. She publicly dumped Connor, tagging his profile and ensuring her thousands of followers knew exactly what transpired at the country club. Connor was left humiliated and alone. Furthermore, the protective shield of my parents' money had finally shattered. When the audio rental company demanded $3,000 for the shattered monitor speaker, my father could no longer simply swipe a credit card to make the problem disappear. The bank accounts were decimated. For the first time in his life, Richard Carver looked at his son and refused to pay the bill. He forced Connor to leave the comfort of the basement. He made his 24-year-old son secure a minimum wage job at a local automated car wash. Connor had to spend his days scrubbing wheel wells, wiping down rims, and drying windshields in the bitter Chicago cold, just to pay off the debt his own incompetence had generated. His soft hands blistered, and his designer clothing was replaced by a damp polyester uniform. The Carver family structure had collapsed under the weight of its own entitlement. I remained in my city condominium watching the fallout from a safe distance through the quiet updates provided by former colleagues and industry contacts. I assumed the destruction of their resources would force them into silent submission. I believed the severity of the consequences would keep them far away from my life, ensuring a permanent peace. I drastically underestimated the sheer stubbornness of a mother who refused to accept defeat. The financial penalty was paid, and the professional ruin was complete. But the emotional war was not entirely over. 2 weeks after the Phantom Gala, a new threat emerged, testing my boundaries in a way I had not anticipated. 2 weeks after the collapse of the Oakwood Country Club Gala, my physical isolation was breached. I was sitting at the kitchen island of my downtown Chicago condominium, reviewing a logistical spreadsheet for a legitimate corporate client. The intercom panel mounted on the wall buzzed. I pressed the communication button. The front desk security concierge informed me that Susan Carver was waiting in the lobby, requesting immediate access to my private residence. I did not authorize her to come up. I was not going to allow her to step over my threshold and infect the sanctuary I had built for myself. I instructed the concierge to ask her to wait near the front seating area. I saved my spreadsheet, closed my laptop, and took the elevator down to the ground floor. The lobby of my building is a sprawling expanse of white marble and polished steel. It is intentionally designed to be sterile and intimidating. I walked out of the elevator bay and spotted my mother immediately. She looked as though she had aged a decade in the span of 14 days. The pristine, immaculate styling she usually favored was gone. She wore a beige trench coat that looked slightly rumpled. She clutched a heavy designer handbag tightly against her chest, wielding it like a physical shield against the reality of her new circumstances. Her posture was stooped, defensive, and utterly devoid of the haughty arrogance she had displayed at my housewarming brunch. I approached her, stopping several feet away to maintain a clear physical boundary. I did not offer a hug. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited. My mother looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and bruised with exhaustion. When she realized I was not going to initiate the conversation, she deployed her ultimate weapon. It was not shouting. It was not overt rage. It was the agonizing, quiet weaponization of Midwestern guilt. "You made us look like fools, Hillary." She wept softly, her voice trembled, echoing faintly off the marble walls. She refused to meet my gaze directly, staring instead at a point somewhere near my collarbone. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not mention the viral infection or the hospital stay. Her opening statement was a masterclass in shifting blame. "We had to take out a second mortgage on the house," she continued, her tears spilling over her mascara. "The penalties from the venue were astronomical. Your father had to drain his retirement accounts and pay those terrible early withdrawal taxes just to keep the bank from taking our home. He cannot find work. All of his industry friends are avoiding him. We are ruined." She paused, waiting for the familiar dynamic to engage. She expected me to crumble. For 28 years, she had conditioned me to respond to her distress by opening my wallet and offering solutions. She expected the dutiful daughter of the silent bank to apologize for causing her pain and immediately offer a financial remedy to fix the disaster. I kept my hands perfectly still at my sides. I looked at the woman standing in front of me. This was the same woman who had worn a green and gold soccer scarf on the morning of my college graduation. This was the same woman who had silently clinked her mimosa glass while my father ordered me to upgrade the floral arrangements for an engagement proposal I was expected to finance. This was the woman who had ignored my hospitalization because Connor needed a custom tuxedo fitting. "I did not make you look like anything, Mom," I stated. My voice was calm, even and entirely devoid of the apology she desperately sought. She flinched as if I had struck her. Her grip on the designer handbag tightened until her knuckles turned white. "How can you say that?" She choked out, a fresh wave of tears hitting her cheeks. "How could you do this to your own family? We raised you. We provided for you." I stepped back, increasing the distance between us. "You did not provide for me. You utilized me. You treated my professional career as a slush fund for your golden boy. You signed those Oakwood contracts, Mom." I continued outlining the unassailable facts. You and Dad demanded a $50,000 vanity project. You hijacked my housewarming brunch to add another $30,000 in engagement demands. You told me to stop being dramatic when I was lying in an emergency room bed hooked to an intravenous drip. She opened her mouth to protest, to offer another excuse about Connor's delicate nature or my father's stressful career. I cut her off. I did not steal from you. I did not forge a single document. I did exactly what you commanded me to do. I organized the event. I booked the vendors. I secured the luxury you demanded. For the first time in your entire life, I simply stepped back and let you afford exactly what you earned. The silence that fell between us was profound. It was the sound of a toxic system finally breaking apart. My mother stared at me, her mouth slightly open, unable to formulate a defense against the raw truth. She was waiting for me to break the tension, to offer a lifeline, to be the reliable bank one last time. I realized in that moment that she would never truly understand the depth of her own betrayal. She would spend the rest of her life believing she was the victim of an ungrateful child, rather than acknowledging she was the architect of her own ruin. I had nothing left to say. The transaction was complete. I turned around and walked back toward the elevator bay. I did not look over my shoulder as the heavy steel doors slid shut, leaving her standing alone in the cold marble lobby, weeping over a designer handbag she could no longer afford to replace. The confrontation was over. The physical and emotional ties were severed. But navigating the new reality, the quiet aftermath of absolute liberation, presented a final, entirely different kind of challenge. It has been exactly 6 months since I watched the heavy steel elevator doors slide shut on my weeping mother. Half a year of uninterrupted, pristine silence. My mobile device no longer buzzes with urgent demands for bridge loans or hysterical complaints about luxury event florists. I blocked Richard, Susan, and Connor across every conceivable digital platform the moment I returned to my condominium that Tuesday afternoon. I changed my email addresses and upgraded the security protocols at my residential building. At first, the profound quiet felt unnatural. My nervous system was so thoroughly conditioned to brace for the next familial crisis that I spent the first few weeks waking up at dawn expecting a catastrophic text message. My heart would race every time my phone chimed with a standard calendar reminder. But eventually, the residual adrenaline faded. The hypervigilance slowly dissolved. I learned how to drink my morning coffee looking out over the Chicago skyline without mentally scanning my inbox for incoming emotional threats. The peace I cultivated became a tangible, living thing inside my home. I did not actively seek out information regarding their fallout. I felt no desire to monitor their decline. In an interconnected society, however, news possesses a remarkable ability to find you, whether you seek it or not. I heard the final casualty report through a former suburban neighbor who occasionally comments on my professional social media profile. The sprawling 4-bedroom house, the pristine property where my father used to proudly wash his leased luxury sedan and my brother staged his amateur recruitment videos, is gone. The bank did not officially foreclose, but the looming threat of the mechanics lien forced a desperate distress sale. Richard and Susan had to liquidate the property well below market value just to satisfy the country club debt and cover the brutal early withdrawal penalties levied against their drained retirement portfolios. They relocated to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a far less prestigious zip code. There is no space for a basement disc jockey studio or a walk-in closet for designer dresses. My father is, allegedly, working as a mid-level claims adjuster for a cut-rate regional insurance provider. It is a humiliating public downgrade from his previous executive ambitions. As for Connor, the loss of his parental safety net proved permanent. The neighbor mentioned seeing him waiting at a public bus stop during a recent rainstorm, wearing a faded jacket and holding a dented steel thermos. He is still working at the automated car wash, scrubbing windshields and vacuuming floor mats to pay off his mounting personal debts. The golden boy finally met the real world, and it offered him zero grace. Hearing about their fate did not bring a rush of euphoric vindication. I did not open a bottle of champagne to celebrate their ruin. I simply felt profoundly, deeply tired. The chronic exhaustion of carrying their unearned expectations for 28 years finally settled deep into my bones. I realized I needed a hard reset, a physical and mental departure from the environment where the betrayal occurred. I opened my primary savings account and calculated the exact amount of money I would have burned bailing them out of their Oakwood disaster. I used a fraction of those protected funds to book a 2-week solo vacation to Carmel, California. I rented a secluded cedar cabin nestled high in the rugged cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I spent 14 days wrapped in a thick wool blanket, sitting on the rocky shoreline. I watched the dense gray fog roll over the dark water, listening to the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the stone. I drank rich, dark roast coffee in quiet, independent cafes and walked miles along the winding coastal trails, breathing in the sharp, salt air. There were no corporate timelines to manage. There were no luxury catering contracts to negotiate. There were no ungrateful relatives demanding my financial submission. For the first time in my entire adult life, my resources, my time, and my energy belonged exclusively to me. Suddenly on that California beach, watching the relentless tide erase my footprints from the wet sand, I finally digested the hard psychological lesson that took nearly 3 decades to learn. You cannot purchase genuine affection from people who view you as an appliance. A household appliance is not cherished or respected. It is simply expected to function on demand. You do not love your refrigerator. You expect it to keep your food cold. The moment it stops working for your convenience, you kick the door, complain about the inconvenience, and eventually discard it for a newer model. That was my designated role in the Carver family structure. I was the reliable generator keeping their grand delusions powered. They did not value my academic achievements, my fierce independence, or my physical health. They only valued my utility. When I was admitted to the hospital with a dangerous viral fever, my father only saw a malfunctioning machine that threatened his personal schedule. When I finally stopped functioning for their benefit, they turned on me instantly, weaponizing their guilt. I realized during that quiet vacation that I did not lose a loving family. I simply unplugged myself from a parasitic grid. I discarded them before they could drain the very last drop of my ambition. If you are listening to this story and you recognize your own weary reflection in my journey, I need you to pay close attention. If you are the designated workhorse of your toxic household, the silent bank, the reliable fixer, the one who sacrifices your own peace to maintain their comfortable illusions, hear me now. Put the heavy burden down. Step away from the endless, exhausting cycle of guilt and financial extortion. Let them pay their own bills. Let them navigate their own manufactured crises without your intervention. Let them face the cold, hard consequences of their own reckless choices. Setting a firm boundary is not an act of revenge. It is a fundamental act of survival. You are not a bad person for choosing your own peace over their chaotic demands. You owe them nothing. Reclaim your time, your energy, and your financial security. You deserve to build a life where your worth is not measured by your utility to others. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. I hope my experience offers you the clarity and the courage you need to write your own resolution. Until next time, protect your peace, guard your resources, and always read the fine print on the contracts.
There is a quiet, unspoken contract written into the foundation of the traditional family structure, a deeply ingrained cultural expectation that suggests our homes will always be our safest harbors. In American society, we are often taught that the family unit is the ultimate safety net, a place where unconditional support is freely given and deeply reciprocated. We imagine Sunday dinners, shared celebrations, and a mutual safety that protects us from the harshness of the outside world. Yet, as we examine the profound and heartbreaking saga of Hillary Beatrix and her family, we are forced to confront a much darker reality. Sometimes, the harbor is exactly what sinks the ship. Through Hilary Beatrix's story, we can glean profound and practical messages for parents, especially in the context of American society, about how to educate children and guide their future based on family upbringing. The most important message we can take from this tragedy is the absolute necessity of fairness and unconditional love, which means we must avoid favoritism among children. Imagine standing on a graduation stage, a moment that represents the culmination of years of sacrifice, only to look into the crowd and realize the seats reserved for your parents are empty. In the story, Hilary's parents downplayed her most important milestone, her college graduation, in order to attend a semi-professional soccer game of her younger brother Connor. This is not merely a scheduling conflict. It is a profound declaration of worth. When parents begin labeling one child as the golden boy and another as the fixer, it will inevitably create a permanent rift in family relationships. Love cannot be conditional, and it certainly cannot be a ranking system. Parents need to understand that each child needs to be recognized and present in their important moments. When we fail to witness our children's triumphs because we are too busy indulging another child's hobbies, we plant the seeds of a resentment that no amount of time can fully erase. This dynamic of favoritism bleeds directly into the way we educate our children on responsibility and self-reliance. The story shows a stark contrast in parenting styles. On one hand, we see Hilary, who had to work extra jobs, take out student loans, and work 70 hours a week to succeed. She embodies the classic ideal of independence and grit. On the other hand, we have Connor, who was overprotected, still dependent on his parents at age 24, and without a stable career. As parents, it is incredibly tempting to shield our children from the sting of failure, to offer them a soft place to land whenever the world pushes back. However, the message here is undeniable. Overindulging children, as Connor's parents did, is not love, but rather depriving them of their ability to survive. By constantly bailing him out, they clipped his wings. Furthermore, the assumption that a successful child has the obligation to financially support the entire family is a serious mistake in family education. Success should not be a sentence to a lifetime of financial servitude to the very people who refuse to support that journey in the first place. If we look deeper, we realize that practical support means very little without emotional awareness. Parents should not treat their children as tools or banks to serve their ambitions or vanity. There is a chilling moment in Hilary's journey that strips away the final illusion of parental care. When Hilary was hospitalized with a high fever, her parents thought she was overreacting and were only concerned with preparing a party for Connor. This lack of basic human compassion is devastating. The lesson we must internalize is that good traditional family education must be based on empathy. If parents ignore their children's health and emotions, they are severing the bond and trust that the child has in them. A family cannot survive on the superficial exchange of funds and favors. It requires a pulse of genuine care. When a parent looks at their sick child and sees only an inconvenience to their social calendar, the relationship ceases to be familial. It becomes purely transactional. This transactional mindset ultimately corrupts the future orientation of the entire family, particularly regarding the importance of reputation and ethics. In modern culture, there is immense pressure to project an image of pristine success and wealth. The parents in the story tried to build a false future by using their daughter's money and success to polish their own image and start a business. They wanted the prestige without the sweat, using their child's hard-earned resources to fund a hollow facade. As a result, they not only lost their daughter's affection, but also their business reputation when the truth about their finances was revealed. The message is clear. Parents should be role models of integrity. The best future orientation for children is not about how much money they leave them, but about teaching them how to stand on their own 2 feet and treat those around them fairly. You cannot build a legacy of respect on a foundation of exploitation. Ultimately, Hilary's journey is a masterclass in the necessity of drawing a line in the sand. Setting boundaries in the family is an incredibly difficult task, especially when society constantly whispers that we must forgive and accommodate our blood relatives at all costs. Finally, the story conveys that setting boundaries is not revenge, but a way to protect oneself and maintain respect. It is an act of profound self-preservation. Parents need to teach their children that help should come from willingness and respect, not from coercion or exploiting the name of family. When a relationship relies entirely on one person sacrificing their peace so that another can avoid discomfort, the word family loses its meaning. In short, the core message for parents is, invest in a genuine relationship with your children through presence and fairness, instead of valuing only the superficial aspects or conveniences they provide. Stories like Hillary's are uncomfortable precisely because they force us to examine the quiet, hidden fractures in our own lives. If these reflections on family dynamics, the hidden costs of favoritism, and the brave pursuit of personal boundaries resonate with you, I invite you to join our growing community of listeners and thinkers. Please subscribe and follow the channel Sophia Told Stories for more deeply human, thought-provoking narratives that hold a mirror up to the complexities of the lives we live. As you close this page, think about the tables you sit at and the people who pull up chairs beside you. Think about the quiet sacrifices made in the name of loyalty and the invisible ledgers kept in the hearts of those who feel unseen. Are we building foundations for our children to stand upon? Or are we constructing cages disguised as homes? The answer, much like the delicate balance of love and expectation, is rarely spoken out loud. It is found in the silence of empty chairs, the weight of unsaid words, and the haunting realization that the people we are supposed to trust the most are sometimes the very ones we must learn to walk away from.